Next, I want to write the functionality that will display a list of my registered users. And mostly, we're just going to do this to show you how you could do it, how you could read a file, which backs up some of the stuff that we learned in the previous lessons. So now, I'll bring back my sidebar and create a new file. Once again, this file needs to be secure. We will call it registeredusers.php. As always, the first thing that we're going to do is require registeredusers.template.php, and I'll go ahead and create that now. Within here, because we're not using any kind of fragments, I'll just add another big crop of HTML. That's okay for this very small project. And within here, we'll say H1, folks on your mailing list. And I'm also going to add a note here, needs to be locked down. Once again, this file should not be viewed by anyone but you. You need to add some level of authentication or protection to ensure that regular users can't gain access to this file. That's a bit beyond where we are just yet. We haven't reviewed authentication in too much detail, so I'm going to leave that as a comment for now. So first, I want to visualize or think about how I want to interact with it. So within my view, ideally what I would do is something like this. If there are registered users, something like that, then what I should do is filter through them. So I should do for each registered user as user. And then within here, I would echo out a list item which contains information about the username. And ideally what I would do is something like echo their name, and then an anchor tag, which would have a mail to link, something like this. And then display their email address. Yeah, that looks good. If there are registered users, then we want to filter through them, so we need to get those users within an array. And for each one as users, we would assume that user would be an array that contains their name and email. So maybe I would do list name email equals user. And if user is an array that contains something like name equals Joe and email equals email, then we could say list name email equals this, and that will take the keys in the array and assign them to variables respectively. Okay, this looks pretty good to me. So we get these new name and email variables, we insert them into a little HTML fragment, and then we rinse and repeat for every single user. But what if there aren't any registered users? Well, in that case, I will do else echo no registered members. There we go. That looks pretty good to me. So now I need to write the functionality that will make this possible. And notice again, if you're thinking, wait, I thought views were supposed to be dumb, this is okay. We're not doing any actual logic. All we're doing is receiving an array. We're not writing any real logic other than just filtering through it, and that's okay. So to make this work, I'm going to come back to registered users. I'm going to require the functions.php file. And now, because I know I want to have access to this registered users, I'm going to create that up here. And what should that do? So that variable should be equal to something that will get the registered users. Okay, well that's readable, and that makes for a good function name. Get registered users. Notice how much more readable that is. All right, so we've set that up. Now we need to write that logic, and we'll do it right here. Function get registered users. So the first thing this function will need is the path, meaning the path to the file that we're working with. By default, we've set that to mailinglist.php, but I'm going to give them the option of overriding that. Now the next thing that I noticed though is I have referenced mailinglist.php here and here. Now what if that changes to something like list? Well then I will need to find that in every piece of my application and update it. Now, if you're working in a very small project like this, it's probably okay, but you might also want to set up some kind of configuration file where you store this. For now, I don't want to focus on overkill here, so let's simply create a constant called mailing list, and that's going to be equal to mailinglist.php. Now, if I echo mailing list like that and we die, let's reload the page. Now I have that path, and we can reference that in both locations. Like so. So let's just make sure it still works. I can add a name, Joe at yahoo.com. Sign up. Yeah, that seems to be working. Go to mailing list. Yeah, that's all still working. But now, if we need to change the mailing list path, we only have to do so in one place. And this solution will be fine for this project. All right, so now we have our getRegisteredUsers function. The first thing I want to do is take advantage of the file function. So if I run file path, what that's going to do is read mailing_list.php, and it's going to return an array where each line within this file is its own item within the array. So let me give you an example. We'll do users equals file path. And now if I print our users, let's open up this file, registeredusers.php. And if I view the source, isn't that cool? We have this new array, and we've turned each line into its own item. And that's really neat if you think about it. So now that we have these new items, all we have to do is find a way to separate the name from the email address. Well, let's figure out how we could do the first item, and then we will slowly improve this. What if I did this, users0, and we called explode on it, and we're going to explode it at the colon and a space. So that means we're going to explode it using this as the delimiter. And that will separate that into an array with the name and the email address. So let's try this out. Explode, and then we are working with the first item within that array, and I'm going to print R that value. Now if I reload, now we have this new array where the first item is the user's name, and the second item is their email address. And that was really easy. But the next thing I want to do is be careful, because what if, let's go back to mailing list, what if the user set their username to something like this? Like this, they entered HTML. Well now, if I reload it, yeah, now it's breaking because we are displaying that HTML, and that's not good. So now I know that I also need to run this through HTML special chars. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take advantage of array map, which we reviewed in a previous lesson. And I will say if there are users, because remember, we don't want to do anything if nothing was returned. So if there is at least one item within that array, then I'm going to return array map. We pass a callback, and then as a second parameter, what we are working with, users. So now we're going to map over each item within that array, and each item we will reference with the variable name user. So let's print our user and see what we're working with here. View the source. Now we can see each one is equal to that full line, like so. So let's go ahead and explode it again, and I'll call it bits equals explode, add a colon and a space, explode the user. Now, once again, print our bits, reload it, there we go, now we have this array. But also, I want to make sure that I filter through each of these arrays and run the values through HTML special chars. So, we're getting a little Inception-like now. We're going to run array map again, and we're going to call HTML special chars for each item within that bits array. So let's print R, that value, so you can see it. Run it, and now don't get confused, array map is filtering over the bits array. We know the bits array is equal to this, which contains the name and the email address. So what we're doing is we're saying, for each item within that bits array, run it through the HTML special chars function. So that will then filter through that, update each value, and array map will return a new array containing those updated values. And now up here you can see, yep, that has been run through HTML special chars. Rather than print R, I'm going to return that. So yeah, that's a little like Inception. Return array map, we're going to explode it, we're going to run each of those values through HTML special chars, and that looks good, even though we can refactor this a bit. For now, I just want to make sure it works, and then I'll show you how we can get rid of that. Let's recap. This function will grab each item within the file, and it's going to map over them and separate each line within the mailing list into an array that contains their name as well as their email address. That is what will be returned from the getRegisteredUsers function. However, if nothing is returned, maybe there's no registered users, otherwise we will return false. Or, because this is the end of our function and we're not running anything else, we can just get rid of that entirely, like so. Because if there is a count, we're returning here. If there's not a count, we keep going and then we return from the function, and we simply return false. Let's try this out. I'm going to come back and print our registered users. Let's see what we get. One more time, we get this array, and notice each item within the array is another array that contains information about the user, and within that array is each item that has been run through HTML special chars. Pretty cool. So the next thing is, now that we know that's working, let's come back to functions.php and see if we can fix this. Rather than running each item through HTML special chars, why don't we just do it right here, HTML special chars. That way we run that full string, which would be this full thing, we run that through HTML special chars. And that way we don't have to filter through that new array and run each item again. And now, rather than storing that within the variable bits, I'm going to return that. Okay, let's try this again. Reload the page, view the source, and now we're getting the exact same thing, but we've refactored our code. So now that we know that this function will successfully grab all registered users, let's come back to our view, uncomment this, and make sure it's working. Reload the page and check it out. Folks on your mailing list, and we have this full name. And even though the user entered some tags here, we were smart enough to know that we need to run that through HTML special chars. So we have two more things to do. We have one where we have to take a look at the security aspect, and two, which will be a bit of bonus credit if you'd like to keep watching. So the first thing I noted was that we have to be careful about mailing lists, because right now, still, anyone can view this and have access to all of the folks on our mailing list and all of their email addresses, which is bad. So we're going to fix this. I'm going to close all of this out, open up our sites directory, and I will go into our simple email registration. And this will represent our document root once we upload it to our web host. So we will simply take the mailing list and take it outside of the document root, or bring it up to its parent like this. Now in this case, because we're working locally, Sandbox would be the document root, but we're going to assume that ultimately this would be the document root. So I'm going to store that as a sibling of the document root. Now, if we come back and I try to load this, nope, they can't even get access to it once it's a live site. So now we just need to update a few things, because this will no longer work. If we set an email address, we're going to get this thank you, but if we come back, what's happened now is because we haven't updated the path, it's simply created that file again. So yeah, we need to fix that. I'm going to delete all of this, and now, because we stored it within a constant, we can just update this to the parent directory. Now let's try it again, and we will set the name to Envato Test, Envato@test.com, sign up. That's working. Now let's come back and make sure it is by hitting space. Yep, that has been added. But now the user has no way, assuming this is the document root, to gain access to that mailing list. The next thing is, again, to make sure that registered users is locked down as well, because they can't access the mailing list, but they can access the registered users file. And this would likely be stored within an administration section where there would be some level of authentication to ensure that this page can only be viewed if you've logged in. Now, because we have not reviewed authentication in enough detail, I'm going to show you another little trick by using an htaccess file. And this is where we can tell Apache, unless the IP address of the person who requests this page is our own, then you shouldn't allow them to see that file. Now, this isn't specifically an Apache course, but we'll dig in just a bit to show you how this works. The first step is to create a new directory where the protected information should be stored. I'm just going to call it admin right now. Next, if we go back to our sandbox into simple email registration, we're going to move both of these files within our admin folder. Now within here, I can create a new file called .htaccess, and this will contain information specifically for the admin folder. So I'm going to begin by writing myself a quick note here that says deny everyone but myself. So here's how we can do this, and I'm not going to cover the syntax too much. It definitely can be confusing, and this is mostly a PHP course. So I will link to some additional reading on working with htaccess files in the show notes of this video. I'll begin by saying limit to get post and put. Close that out, and within here, I'll begin by saying order will be deny all. And what I'm going to do is deny from all. So this alone is going to deny access to the files within this directory from everyone. So if we take that alone and try to access the registered users file, Now we get this forbidden result. You don't have permission to access this file. So this is really helpful. If I change that to allow from all, yeah, now we can have access to it. But now we're getting this error that it can't open that file. And of course it can't because we've changed directories. If I come back to registered users, it's looking for functions.php within the admin directory. So what I'll do now is go up a directory. But I think there will still be one other problem. If I reload it, yep, that's still not changing it. So the problem is now at this point we are requiring this file, but then we're still trying to access mailing list from the admin directory. So if we were to add one more parent directory, I bet that would work. Yes, but that won't work for the regular view. So we're going to change this just a bit to be a little more flexible. We're instead going to use the document root, and we can figure out the document root by using the server superglobal. So the document root will be the root of your projects. And for a web host, your document root would be your main applications directory. In our case, the document root would be the htdocs folder where you have all of your PHP folders. So then within there, we could say, go into the sandbox and bring in mailinglist.php. Now we have a longer string. And let's prove that. Let's comment that out, reload it, yeah. And now we have /applicationsmap into my document root, and then we grab that file like that. So if we go back a few steps, I think this should work now. And yes, that is working great. So now we're making some progress. If we go back to htaccess, we're going to deny from everybody, but I do want to allow from my IP address. So let me grab that real quick. I will Google what is my IP address, and that looks good to me. So I will grab that and allow from that value. If you want to allow maybe other people on your team, you could do that as well. Or you could even allow from a specific domain. In this case, that looks good to me. So let's close these out. If you'd like to learn more about htaccess files, this link will be in the show notes. And this is something that I've bookmarked permanently, created by Jeff Starr. It's a massive list of various things that you can do with htaccess files. So definitely refer to that. All right, let's come back and I'm going to reload the page. And if you do get this error where you've allowed it from your IP address, but it's not working, that would be because you are working locally. And I bet if you were to change this to : 1 and try it again, yeah, that's going to work. But that's because I'm working locally. So to give you an example, if I echo server, and I believe it's called server ADDR, sometimes you'll have to look these up. Yeah, I'm going to get : 1, and that's referring to my local host. But if you were to upload this to your web host, then you would use your IP address. So what you could do is then say, or allow from any number of IP addresses. So let's come back, get rid of all of that, try it again, and now it's working for us. But if anybody else tries to access this page, unless they have my same IP address, which they won't have access to this file. So the next thing I want to do is just a little bit of cleanup. So notice we have all these functions. And first I want you to note that there's really no order. We have some functions that will validate a string, but we have other more important functions that get the registered users. So even for a very small project like this, we're already starting to see that it can be tough to have just one all-encompassing functions file. So we're going to look at fixing that in future lessons, but for now, we can go a long way by just adding some comments. So I have created a little comment string right here that adds a big heading, and then I can add a comment. So in this case, this one would add a new item to the registered users list, and this will be very helpful when you come back to it in 6 months' time. We'll do another one, comment, and we'll just say preserve form state. Notice I'm giving some spacing between each one. A valid email, you probably don't need it. It's fairly readable, but we can do this if you want. Determines whether an email address is valid. And next right here, we're going to give 3 lines between each. That's just how I like it. And this one returns an array of all registered users. And while I'm at it, I'm going to take this one at the bottom and bring it to the top. That way it's connected to add registered users. So now this is a lot more readable. Our functions are separated with some space. Don't be afraid of space. Everything doesn't need to be one line apart. And now when you come back to this in 6 months, you can see, okay, so this function is going to add a new item to the registered users list. This one will return an array of all of the registered users, and that's a lot more readable. Now, I think that's been enough for today. What I was going to do was show you how we could turn the status messages into a flash static method where you could say flash.set this message, and then within your view, you could do flash.get, and then you could even pass in an HTML fragment, and that would be a little more readable. But you know what? I think this is good for today. There's a lot that we covered. I think a bunch of you are going to have some questions, so definitely go to tutsplus.com/forums. Ask any questions that you did not understand, and I'm there every day waiting to help you. So my name is Jeffrey Way, and I really hope you enjoyed this lesson.